Hello, everyone. A very good morning to you and welcome to this morning's webinar session. Before we begin, I would like to run through some housekeeping rules. First and foremost, this is a live Facebook session and we welcome interaction with us through comments, likes, and shares. If any of you have any questions related to this morning's session, please kindly ensure that your privacy setting is switched on to public specifically for this session. When you comment, we recommend keeping your comments concise and tactful. This is an avenue for us to gather knowledge and grow together, so we welcome your participation as well. With that, let us dive into today's session entitled Wasted or Harvested, a dialogue on reclaimed wastewater from treated effluent. I am your host, Joseph Cheong, and there was a time, not in the distant past, when we had to stay at homes due to the various movement control orders. Now, as more businesses are opening up and physical attendance are required at workplaces, one thing remains the same. A large amount of wastewater, be it from the toilet or kitchen, are generated. In one day alone, all of the wastewater contributed by me and you come up to a whopping 6,000 million liters. This translates to about 2,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of wastewater. And in just one day, this amount of wastewater is treated before being released into the rivers or water bodies, and it is such a waste of resources. But what if I told you that this same so-called dirty water can be cleaned up and reused, even to the point that it cleans other stuff as well? Yes, that era is now. Joining us this morning to expound on this topic are Encik Azwan Ahmad Zadi, Head of Corporate Planning Department of Indah Water Consortium Sdn Berhad, Mr. Kevin Lee Shihmin, Head of Finance and Strategy of Pengurusan Air Selangor Sdn Berhad, and Dr. Nor Hayati Abdullah, Council Member of Malaysian Water Association, who will share their thoughts, knowledge, and experience regarding reclaimed water from treated effluent. Leaning into the session, I would first like to introduce our speaker of this morning, Encik Azwan Ahmad Zadi. With over 15 years of consolidated experience in corporate transformation, strategic planning, business development, and sustainability, Encik Azwan currently serves as Head of Corporate Planning Department in Indah Water Consortium. Working closely with other leaders in IWK and a vibrant team in the department, Encik Azwan is responsible in ensuring strategies are comprehensive on meeting the aspiration and visions of the company. These include the role of crafting and managing strategic initiatives, stakeholder management and reporting, quality management, business development, and transformation. Prior to IWK, Encik Azwan has served in similar roles in automotive, water, and aviation industry. With that, I would like to hand over the time now to Encik Azwan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Joseph, the moderator for today, for a very kind and mildly exaggerated introduction of myself. Right? It is such an honor to be able to share the same platform this morning with great subject matter experts, the like of Mr. Kevin from Selangor and also Dr. Nor Hayati this morning. And as highlighted by our moderator, reclaimed water from treated effluent is a very interesting topic. And today I'll be sharing on IWK's aspiration, where we are right now, and the upcoming journey as we take up water reclamation initiative as one of our strategic initiatives towards achieving our vision. Right. Right. So let's start my quick presentation, if I may. And the next slide, please. IWK, since its establishment in 1994, has grown from being a sewage services operator to be a sewage services business by itself. As you can see in this particular slides, IWK manage an end-to-end holistic services as far as sewage services is concerned, particularly focusing on the O&M or operation and maintenance of connected public sewage systems. So that's the biggest portion of IWK's business. And on top of that, we are also responsible for the dislodging services for the various septic tanks nationwide. And on top of these two core businesses, we are also offering other services in terms of sewage planning, certifying services, consultancy, training, sewage capital works for refurbishment management, and more interestingly, or our focus for today, the latest addition of our array of services offered by IWK is the water reclamation plans or the water reclamation services that we have just added into IWK's portfolio. Right. Next slide, please. All right. So IWK and WRP in a nutshell, I think it's important to see that as you are aware that IWK now, Alhamdulillah, we are operating throughout all the states in Peninsular Malaysia. We have taken over Kelantan early this year, and soon, inshallah, in Johor Bahru and Pasir Gudang as well. So technically, we exist throughout the nation, and we have more than 7,000 sewage treatment plants all over the Peninsular Malaysia and Labuan right now. So that's a huge advantage that we have. And out of these 7,000 sewage treatment plants, we are producing about slightly above 6,000 MLD treated effluent. And this treated effluent is actually, standard A and standard B. Those are very good quality treated effluent that are complying to the requirements of Jabatan Alam Sekitar. So these are the water that we release back to the ecosystem as part of the water cycle, as a result of all the treatment that we have done in our more than 7,000 sewage treatment plants. So it's a very natural process. It's part of the water cycle, the second half of the water cycle, and it has its importance towards the water cycle process. And out of that, I think Another important thing that we want to highlight is that KASA, or the Ministry Kementerian Alam Sekitar dan Air, has set a target of 1,500 MLD water reclamation target by the year 2030. So it's a tall order, it's a blue sky target. However, that it is also something that gets us excited. So it shows a commitment that we have within the industry. So it's not just something that IWK aspire to achieve, but it's something that is being supported and being aimed for throughout the industry and all the players within the industry. And in achieving this target, we hope to be able to collaborate further with a lot of other players, other water operators. And ongoing right now, we have two collaborations with state water operator, namely with Air Selangor and Syarikat Air Melaka Berhad. So this is just in a nutshell on IWK and the latest status in terms of our development of water reclamation business. In the next few slides, I will go into detail in each of these particular boxes. Next, please. All right, so one might ask us, why is it important for companies like IWK to embark on a water reclamation business? So I think the best way to be able to address this particular question is to go back to this concept of circular economy. You know, as a nation, we are progressing from linear economy towards circular economy, where it's all about new way of thinking on resource use, on recycling, on maximizing the value of our resource, recycling as much as possible. So those are the elements of circular economy that we aspire to achieve through this particular initiative. And it is not something that we are doing in isolation. As a matter of fact, if I may refer to the Rancangan Malaysia ke-12, in chapter 8 and chapter 9, quite describes circular economy in quite detail in terms of how the nation is going towards green growth and whatnot. So it's interesting that when we are doing this, so we know that we are part of the nation's agenda towards developing circular economy as well as green growth. So where does IWK fits in into this whole circular economy picture? So traditionally or previously, as I mentioned earlier, we produce about more than 6,000 MLD treated effluent. And although these are good quality treated effluent, we release it back, achieving all the compliance requirements. We release it back to the system. Of course, it has the importance of being, as part of the water cycle, we need to release back to the system so that some of it will be reused and we take up as part of the water intake for the water treatment plants. But we felt that out of the 6,000 MLD, there could be a significant volume that can be further reused. So this is where the idea of water reclamation plant ataupun water reclamation business comes into the picture. As you can see on the slide, the bottom right corner, where you see that instead of releasing back to the rivers, some portion of the sewage treatment plant are further channeled to water reclamation, and through a processes in water reclamation such as ultrafiltration, reverse osmosis, the reclaimed water can now be channeled back to the industry. It can be channeled to the industry. So this is in a way that giving an alternative water supply towards the industry as well. So this is something exciting. A lot of modern nations are doing it. We are hoping that we'll be able to develop this further in upcoming years. Next slide, please. All right, and as I mentioned earlier, that it is something that IWK is very fortunate to have a very good support in terms of from the Ministry, Kementerian Alam Sekitar dan Air. As mentioned earlier, that we have a target of 1,500 MLD of reclaimed water by the year 2030. And how we're going to achieve that? It will be a mixture of retrofitting some of our existing treatment plants with water reclamation facilities, as well as I was made to understand that new plants, especially the large plants, sewage treatment plants, will also be included or fitted with elements of water reclamation. So making it all these large plants to by default to be built with water reclamation facilities, which is good news for sewage operators and water operators like us. All right. We are also through this particular initiative. If I can go back to the previous slide, sorry. All right. Yeah. Just through this particular initiative, we are also achieving the 33% treated effluent to be recycled by 2030. We are getting there. There's two elements of recycling there. First, our treated effluent, some of it are being recycled for internal use. Some of it are being used for, for the PBTs, for the kerja-kerja landscape dan sebagainya, as well as the bigger portion, or the one that we are focusing on right now, is to channel a significant portion for water reclamation. And by doing all this, we are also achieving SDG targets, particularly SDG 6. Right, next slide. All right, so how does it work? We understand that for these new initiatives that we need to be working hand in hand with a lot of parties. We are lucky and fortunate to have a very good cooperation from agencies within the ministries. As you can see, this particular business model is something that we use for our first WRP in Setia Alam, where we have what has happened is that we have formed a JVCO, or a special purpose vehicle, with Pengurusan Air Selangor Sdn Bhd, and we have formed a JVCO known as Central Water Reclamation. So as you can see in this particular model, that IWK supplies treated effluent to the JVCO, to the WRP. So the JVCO will own, operate, as well as develop the water reclamation plant, and the produced reclaimed water will then be sold to the state water operator. In the case of our first water reclamation plant, it will be Air Selangor, and Air Selangor will then distribute it to the end customer, having the license to do so. So this particular business model shows that the synergy between water operators as the seller or the distributor of the particular reclaimed water, while we retain our expertise in terms of supplying treated effluent, and jointly we develop the expertise in terms of water reclamation. So this particular model is something that we table to our regulator as well, who is very supportive, and we have gotten approvals for this to be carried out, and we are even using the same model to expand further within Klang Valley, as well as we have started exploring in Malacca. Right, next. Right. Speaking of which, these are some of the potential target areas. Of course, generally speaking, WRP can be applied anywhere, but as a good guiding principle, these are some of the criteria where a good water reclamation plant can be materialized. You need areas that are required, areas of particularly industrial areas that require a lot of high water consumption and a certain level of quality in terms of the water that they require as part of their industrial process. And ideally we will be located nearby to IWK STPs, then in terms of reduction of distribution costs and whatnot. So a quick scan throughout the few states throughout the Malaysia, and these are some of the hotspots or the areas that we have zoomed in. Of course, we are not discounting any other areas, but areas of Bayan Baru, Selangor, Klang Valley, Melaka, and JB Pasir Gudang, and to some extent even Labuan are some of the potential areas under our scope right now, and we are working closely with the state operators as well as the other stakeholders in developing this further. Right, next. And of course, just like any other initiatives, there will be challenges that we face. I think challenge number one will always be high capex requirement. Of course, we started off with a small, rather fairly small water reclamation in Setia Alam. More about it after this particular presentation. But eventually, as we grow, we want to be able to look at higher volume of water reclamation being produced, therefore we require higher capex requirement. And how do we achieve this? Of course, right now we can talk about self-funding, but eventually we have to move towards equity, debt, and even a hybrid model of financing. Right? And in terms of other challenges, of course, IWK alone, we have limited access to the industries with high water consumption. We don't have that much data to work on. Of course, when we partner up with our state water operator like Air Selangor, we would have enablers to resolve that particular challenges. And then in terms of regulatory and license, as mentioned, that it's important for me to also highlight that SPAN has been very supportive and came up with a guideline on water reclamation, and we'll be more than happy to comply to that particular guideline. And that in terms of model and whatnot, those are some of the enablers that we have worked on. And I think whatever the business model that I've shared in the slide before is something that we can easily be duplicated with other states as well, depending on the requirements of the industries as well as the state water operators. So the right box mentioned about all these benefits, which I think I briefly mentioned earlier. But I think one important point that I just like to add that besides all these, benefits towards environment, towards the industry, providing alternative water supply and whatnot, water reclamation is also a good example of how technology or knowledge can be transferred within the industry. So although through the implementation of via a JVCO, there are lot of knowledge sharing between Selangor and IWK as well at operational level, and it's something that is very healthy for the industry. Right. Next slide. I think this is just to show that there are potential financing alternatives, sources of capital to develop, particularly larger water reclamation plants. We're talking about financing coming from the government, the likes of PAB, development financing institutes, as well as private financing opportunities, being an environmental asset. So this is something that the market looks at favorably as well. Right. Next slide. There, I can talk about water sustainability. I can talk about water reclamation for long, but I would advise all of you to visit our website, where we have our latest version of sustainability report, which details out some of our sustainability initiatives, including water reclamation that I've shared in this particular presentation. So you can scan the QR code or visit www.iwk.com.my. Next. All right. So basically, as a conclusion, if I may, IWK is actually achieving not only its environmental sustainability aspirations by recycling our treated effluent, but it also helping in terms of our financial sustainability through a potential new source of income, as well as operational sustainability as we move towards becoming a premier wastewater company. I would close my presentation by saying that it is still a long journey. We are still, I would consider, as an infancy stage of this particular development of the water reclamation in Malaysia. However, there's a lot of prospect. There's a lot of opportunities ahead of us. And from the perspective of IWK, we have the talents from operations, planning and engineering, legal, finance, and of course corporate planning working together. And we have a very great support from our partners, state water operators, as well as regulators and the ministry, of course. So with that, I would like to pass the floor back to Joseph for the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Encik Azwan, for sharing with us this morning. Before we proceed with the next sharing by Mr. Kevin Lee, there is a video on water reclamation plant initiative that we would like to show all of you today. So please enjoy.
We are all well aware that water is a valuable resource to ensure the sustenance of mankind. And Malaysia is blessed with abundant water through ample rainfall. But if we are not careful, we may lose this irreplaceable gift. But what if we told you that Indah Water Consortium IWK Sentiran Berhad, the national sewerage company, can provide an alternative non-potable water source to alleviate the burden of our raw water resources? And IWK is gradually advancing this agenda. Branching out from the traditional sewerage utility shell, IWK adopts a waste-to-wealth approach to support the sustainable water management agenda. IWK aspires to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, UN SDG, particularly Goal 6, clean water and sanitation, through the implementation of the Green Technology Master Plan, GTMP 2017-2030, that focuses on resource recovery efforts. As such, IWK adopts green technology to convert byproducts from wastewater treatment processes into value-added, sustainable, and reusable products, namely bioeffluent, biosolids, and biogas. The reuse of byproducts are aligned with the GTMP's main focus of reusing 33% bioeffluent and 100% biosolids. This is also a shared strategic direction by the Ministry of Environment and Water (KASA), known as Environmental Sustainability Malaysia 2020-2030, which aims to produce 1,500 MLD of reclaimed water from treated effluents. In this regard, IWK reuses one of its byproducts, namely the bioeffluent as an alternative source of non-potable water through the Reclaimed Water Initiative. This initiative involves further treatment of the existing treated effluent produced from IWK's sewage treatment plant (STP) through a modern technological process at the Water Reclamation Plant (WRP), which is specially built near IWK's STP. IWK embarked on a strategic joint venture with Pengurusan Air Selangor Sendirian Berhad Air Selangor to advance this initiative. Through Central Water Reclamation Sendirian Berhad, Central Water, a special purpose vehicle SPV company, the bioeffluent treated at IWK's treatment plant will be further treated at Central Water's reclamation plant that is equipped with advanced technologies to produce non-potable reclaimed water that can be safely used for industrial purposes. Let us dive into the details of how the Reclaim Water initiative works. Central Water's WRP is located in the Regional Sewage Treatment Plant RSTP Petaling at Setia Alam 1 Shah Alam, Selangor. The current capacity of the plant is 4 MLD and will tune up to 7.5 MLD per day after upgrading works. The treatment technologies that Central Water employs include pre-treatment, ultrafiltration or UF, and reverse osmosis or RO. Upon completion of the treatment process, the water is channeled through dedicated distribution pipes before being distributed to industrial end users. The first process is the pre-treatment process. In this pre-treatment process, the treated effluent is channeled through an auto strainer that sieves through coarse particles that may damage the UF filter membranes. When the strainer is blocked by particles, its pressure will build up and will be detected by the system to initiate a backwash process. The backwash reject water is discharged back into treatment works for processing. The filtrate will be delivered to the UF feed storage tank. The storage tank provides a buffer capacity to ensure smooth operation of downstream UF filtration process. The second process is ultrafiltration process. The UF filter can filter up to 1 micron of particles. Particles larger than the permitted size are retained at the UF membrane surface. The UF operates in a cross-flow manner that enables some of the liquid to flush out the retained particles on UF membrane and discharge the water back for treatment works. Other portion of the feed liquid is filtered through the membrane to produce clean UF product water. This UF product water is also stored in the UF product storage tank to ensure smooth operation when the UF is put into backwash mode. In order to ensure smoother operation of the downstream process, 2 banks of UF filtration is operated in parallel. If one unit is out of service for backwashing, the other UF filtration system will still produce UF product water. The last process is the reverse osmosis process. In this process, a very fine membrane is adopted to allow only water molecules to pass through the membrane under high pressure in a RO process. Due to the fact that only water molecules are able to seep through the membrane, an RO membrane will filter solute particles in liquid. Particles that are retained on the surface of the membrane is flushed out during the filtration process and discharged back for treatment works. Water that permeates through the RO membrane is collected as permeate water and stored in RO permeate storage tank. When the treated effluent has undergone all these processes, the final product is distributed to industries for non-potable use. This intricate process ensures that drinking water quality can be used for better purposes instead. The clean water or RO water in WRP that Central Water produces benefits the states and our country as we move towards the circular economy agenda. If you have any further questions or require additional information, kindly visit our website at www.iwk.com.my or visit our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/Indah Water Consortium. Thank you for tuning in to our Water Reclamation Plant virtual tour. Hope to see you again and stay safe.
For participants who just joined us halfway through, we welcome you to the dialogue this morning on reclaimed water from treated effluent. This is a reminder to all our audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them at our comment box, and we'll do our best to go through them after all our speakers have presented. Now, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Kevin Lee, to all of you. Mr. Kevin Lee was appointed as Head of Finance and Strategy on 15 February 2015 and has over 23 years of experience in finance and economics. Mr. Kevin Lee started his career in investment banking with Amanah Merchant Bank and subsequently joined Dana Harta. During his 7-year stint with Dana Harta, he was seconded to the Ministry of Finance, where he advised and played a key role in the implementation of various projects, including the establishment of Pengurusan Aset Air Berhad, or known as PAAP. He subsequently joined PAAP in 2017, assuming the position as head of finance and spearheaded efforts to restructure the water supply industry in Malacca, Negeri Sembilan, and Johor. Prior to joining AIS Selangor, he served as a head of Group Strategic Planning and Investment at Kumpulan Perangsang Selangor Berhad. Mr. Kevin is also one of the directors of Central Water Reclamation Sdn Berhad. Kevin holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the London School of Economics and Political Science and is a Chartered Financial Analyst, CFA, charter holder. Over to you, Mr. Kevin Lee.
Thank you, Joseph, very much for the introduction. Good morning to you as well as to my fellow speakers, Cik Izwan and Dr. Nurhayati, as well as to all the viewers here today. Thank you for taking the time to join us here today. I would also like to extend my gratitude towards Indah Water for inviting me to speak and to be present here today in this dialogue session. So I think Azwan gave a very good overview of the industry. So my slides today will be a little bit more micro, a little bit more focused on the reclaimed water and the central water itself. Can we go to the slides? Yes, so as was previously mentioned by Cik Azwan, it's a joint venture. Central Water Reclamation is a joint venture between AIS Selangor and Indah Water. But before I go into Central Water, I would like to give a brief introduction about AIS Selangor. AIS Selangor is an end-to-end water supply service provider. We operate in Klang Valley, essentially in Selangor, Kuala Lumpur, and Putrajaya. We operate 34 treatment plants, 24 hours a day, producing a total of 4,906 million liters of water per day on average. Our consumer base is 8.4 million consumers estimated. And in terms of pipe lengths, our distribution network spans close to 30,000 kilometers. That has been mapped using GIS. Next, please. So this next slide actually shows the overall view of how we operate. So AIS Selangor, as I said, is an end-to-end service provider. We extract water from the rivers. We treat the water at our treatment plants and then eventually supply to end consumers, both domestic and industrial consumers. So we are regulated by two entities, essentially two regulators. The raw water part, in terms of the rivers, is regulated by LUAS or Lembaga Urus Air Selangor. Whereas from the intake point onwards, the raw water intake point onwards, all the way to the consumers, that is regulated by SPAN or Suruhanjaya Perkhidmatan Air Negara. So that in a nutshell is AIS Selangor and its operations. Next slide, please. So this is a more micro, more focused view on the collaboration between Selangor and Indowater. As you know, Indowater operates the sewage services and the sewage network nationwide. In Selangor, it has partnered with us to also set up a joint venture company called Central Water, 60% owned by Selangor and 40% owned by Indowater, to produce what is called reclaimed water. That reclaimed water is then sold in bulk to Selangor, who then distributes ultimately to end consumers. In the case of reclaimed water, it's sold purely to industrial consumers at this stage. Next slide, please. So this, I think, I won't go into too much detail. I think the video was very insightful in providing a detailed process of how reclaimed water is produced. But I do want to highlight that the first plant that we have set up with Indowater, located in Setia Alam, produces 4 MLD. And we are looking to expand that to a higher capacity, which I'll go into more details later on in my later slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the slide which I would like to spend a little bit more time. So when we talked to interested parties, or when we are looking at the various areas that are suitable for producing water reclamation and distributing reclaimed water, a few factors that we take into consideration. One of which is the location, or rather the distance of the WRP to end consumers. Location is important because the further away the plant is from the consumer, the higher the cost, and the higher the cost, obviously, the higher the charges which would need to be imposed on the end consumer. Also, that's also important is the availability of the source, the bioeffluent. Bioeffluent produced by Indowater obviously tends to be located where the urbanized areas are, where there's high population. Unfortunately, that also tends to be the areas where there isn't high levels of industrialization. So that what that means is we would need to pipe the water to the consumers at the industrial areas. So these two factors are actually interlinked. If there is no bioeffluent source, then we won't be able to, or we will have to pipe it in from a further distance. So these two items are interlinked and are frequently one of the factors which we have to take into consideration when we are evaluating the various locations. The other factor which we take into consideration is the water quality. Water quality is important here because we are selling to industrial consumers. So the different industrial consumers will have differing water quality requirements. Some consumers, like the electronics or electronic manufacturers, will have higher quality requirements in terms of their needs, because they're producing, let's say, printed circuit boards, for example. So they will need water that is purer, or water that does not have added minerals, unlike treated water, which will have mineral content. So water quality, the higher the water quality, obviously the higher the cost required to treat it to that level of quality, and the cost will differ. And the last factor which we look at is, of course, the need to set up a separate distribution network. If there needs to be additional pipelines to pipe the reclaimed water to the consumer, then that adds on to the cost to the end consumer, because reclaimed water, under the regulation imposed by Japan, needs to be distributed in a separate pipeline from the treated water that Icelandic also produces and distributes to its consumers. So there are two parallel and separate pipelines that if you are a customer of Icelandic for treated water, and if you decide to be a customer for reclaimed water, there will be two distinct pipelines which will eventually end up in your plant. In your if you're electronics manufacturer, then in your electronics plant. So there may be additional costs required to essentially connect to the pipeline that brings reclaimed water to your location. So these are some of the factors to consider when we have discussions with our prospective clients. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of reclaimed water? Okay, so because on the treated water side, as you might be aware, I think recently we had a scheduled shutdown. So when there are maintenance, scheduled maintenance that needs to be performed on the plants, there can be water supply disruptions. So having a reclaimed water source allows for a backup source or an alternative source for industrial customers. In the unfortunate event that there are raw water pollution where Iceland cannot extract raw water from the rivers and we have to shut down the plants, then you also have a backup source if you are a customer for reclaimed water. The other benefit is, of course, is the dedicated pipeline. So the pipeline comes directly from the reclaimed water plant. And if you are a single customer, like one of our existing customers, then you have a dedicated pipeline. Additional benefit of reclaimed water is you can tailor-make the water quality to suit your requirements. So if you are like I said, an electronics circuit board manufacturer where you have higher quality requirements, you can discuss with us what sort of requirements you need, and we can tailor make that the water quality to suit your requirements and to meet the standards that you want to have for your plant. Of course, whatever reclaimed water that is produced will and must meet the technical standards issued by SPAN. And more importantly, because we are here today talking about sustainability and the environment, using reclaimed water promotes your business as a sustainable business practice and supports the ESG objectives and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So these are just some of the benefits of reclaimed water. Next slide, please. So where Central Water is concerned, these are our immediate expansion plans. We currently have 4 MLD plant in Setia Alam that is in planning process to be upgraded to 7.5 MLD. But this is a dedicated plant in the sense that whatever water supplied, water produced at this plant is solely for the use by the current end consumer, which is Kosan, glove manufacturer. We are also planning to build a new plant in Section 23 of Shah Alam. At the moment, we're looking at up to 40 MLD in this plant in Section 23, and to supply industries in the surrounding areas. So the surrounding areas, there's quite a good catchment of potential industries that are interested in purchasing the reclaimed water from Iceland. So I think there are glove manufacturers there are electronics manufacturers, as well as some non-food agricultural concerns there as well. And The other expansion plan we're looking at is, of course, the Pantai 2 STP located in Kuala Lumpur. This is the Ina Waters STP that can produce between 100 to 200 mld of reclaimed water. So that is the immediate expansion plans for Central Water. Next slide, please. So apart from glass manufacturers, we are also looking at a whole array of potential industries, rubber and plastic industries, as well as, I think I mentioned, electronics and electrical industries. Textile and other material industries will also be interested, as well as non-food crop agricultural sectors. We will be having discussions with them. Excuse me. As well as any other suitable industries, we will have discussions with the parties who have approached us, as well as we will also be approaching parties that are interested in reclaimed water. So yeah, so that's my slides for today on Central Water and on reclaimed water. Back to you, Joseph.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin Lee. Before we proceed to Dr. Noor Hayati for her sharing, there will be a question and answer session after all the speakers have presented. So continue to drop in your questions. We have already collated a few questions already, and we'll do our best to get to them shortly after Dr. Noor Hayati's presentation. All right, so now let me introduce to you Dr. Noor Hayati. Dr. Noor Hayati Abdullah is currently the Associate Director of UTM International Kuala Lumpur and Associate Professor of Environmental Engineering at University Technology Malaysia. She completed her tenure as a guest scholar at the Graduate School of Advanced Integrated Studies in Human Survivability, also Shishukan, Kyoto University, Japan. Dr. Noor Hayati is recipient of the 2019-2020 ASEAN Science and Technology Fellowship, focusing on the strategic recommendations of water sector transformation under the auspices of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. Dr. Noor Hayati represented UTM and Malaysia at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor for the Fulbright US ASEAN Visiting Scholar Initiatives in 2016 to 2017. In 2018, she received the L'Oreal UNESCO for Women in Science Fellowship. She was also Board of Director of the International Water Association, IWA, from 2014 to 2018, and IWA Fellow and Council Member of the Malaysian Water Association, MWA. At global level, Dr. Noor Hayati has been actively involved with the IWA program and activities since 2000. She received the IWA Young Water Professional IWA YWP Award in 2012 in recognition of her outstanding achievements in wastewater research and active involvement in various professional development programs. With that, I would like to hand over the session to you, Dr. Noor Hayati.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for the kind introduction. Mr. Azwan Ahmad Zadi, Head of Corporate Planning Department, Indah Water Consortium Sdn Bhd. Thank you for this opportunity and invitation to be in this webinar. And Mr. Kevin Lee, Head of Finance and Strategy, Pengurusan Air Selangor Sdn Bhd. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure that you have had a very good insights on water reclamation plan as per shared by Encik Azwan and Mr. Kevin earlier on, my fellow two speakers. May I please have my slides? And today I would like to share with you on wastewater reclamation and reuse potentials towards environmental sustainability. So on this dialogue on reclaimed water from treated effluent. So obviously my next slide will mention that about 80% of water that enters the home goes down the drain daily. And although not yet exhaustively exploited, reclamation and reuse of wastewater are considered as potential mechanisms to mitigate challenge of how might and what can we do about wastewater that goes into the drain daily. You have seen the presentation from IWK talking about the second tab for industries, and then congratulations also to IWK for publishing your sustainability report. And then, of course, the aim for us is to fulfill the 1,500 MLD 2030 target as set by the Ministry of Environment and Water Malaysia. My next slide, please. So here, as you can see, what is it about wastewater? It is talking about what can we do from waste to resource. This is not new. In relation to reclamation, conventional wastewater treatment plants are designed to remove, of course, organic matter, total solids, nutrients, but we still have to relook probably at the emerging pollutants. So worldwide, the majority of wastewater is neither collected or treated. Wastewater is a valuable resource, as mentioned by the previous two fellow speakers, but it is often seen as a burden to be disposed of. So this perception needs to change, and representing academic and the Malaysian Water Association as the key NGO for water transformation here in Malaysia, it is of paramount importance to instill education and awareness creation among public on how might we further use reclaimed water as one of the meaningful resources for water in the future. My next slide, please. So what are the action by water professionals who are the key players towards implementation of national policies that should result from the ambitious 2030 agenda? As mentioned by my fellow speakers just now, it is very important for us to know the usage of reclaimed water as the most experienced activity. And then for several years, wastewater treatment was considered as an alternative to disposal, but not with the intention of reuse for sustainability practices. Reclaiming and reusing water is not a new idea, but its implementation is limited due to many factors. However, practical implementation of the circular economy, as stated in the RMK 12 recently, could be a significant synergies for its implementation in Malaysia. Of course, circular economy is to keep the materials wastes coming from the production of wastewater in the economic system as long as possible, aiming to convert all of these wastes into resources, as advocated by fellow two speakers just now. And of course, as well, the circular economy is aiming to recover materials and enable us to reuse these materials several times within the closed loop, which can be applied for many other sectors. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, wastewater reclamation and reuse potential towards environmental sustainability shall focus on the Sustainable Development Goal 6.3. By 2030, we aim to improve water quality by reducing pollution, eliminating dumping, and minimizing release of hazardous chemicals and materials, halving the proportion of untreated wastewater, and substantially increasing recycling and safe reuse globally. I can already see a very interesting discussion here on our chat box of viewers from Facebook Live on Indah Water Consortium Facebook page, asking about are we ready for using recycled water, and interesting to know. It is interesting to know whether are we ready for this, and what might we do with wastewater reclamation and reuse. The next slide also shows on SDG indicators, which is 6.3.1, as to the proportion of wastewater to be safely treated, and SDG 6.3.2, whereby proportion of bodies of water with good ambient water quality for reuse. This is also in line, the next slide please. This is also in line with the blueprint as produced by the Ministry of Environment and Water, whereby in 2030, 100% of sludge are to be recycled and 33% treated effluent to be recycled as part of the wastewater treatment technology initiatives. Next slide, please. So particularly, the Goal 6 of the Sustainable Development was designed to ensure water resources management in terms of quantity and quality of water supply, sanitation, and everything else is water related. So water quality and availability are the cross-cutting issues for any developmental and operational in a country. By its nature, water sustainability is inclusive and its link with sustainable development is numerous, complex and subtle according to the United Nations Water. So this causes a great challenge and threats to achieve sustainable development goals within the proposed time framework. Sustainability is the most popular three-dimensional concept known by political groups and the scientific community, academics, researchers. So basically, it is the integration and harmonization of the environment, economic and social pillars. And these pillars are also inclusive in the RMK 12 when we talk about water sector transformation. So the 2030 agenda obviously establishes universal, measurable and applicable criteria to evaluate sustainable development, which will be achieved by one of it is through wastewater reclamation and reuse potentials for sustainability of the environment. Next, please. The SDGs are interconnected. Good wastewater management means more clean energy, more sustainable living and healthier ecosystems. How might we do this? Actually, by looking at the impact of global water scarcity, which is the root cause for looking at the wastewater reclamation and reuse plan for the country. The major global water demand are the drivers, inclusive of climate change, water-intensive agriculture, industrialization, rapid urbanization, changing living standards, and economic development. Overutilization of freshwater resources coming from the existing receiving water bodies in our country may cause challenges to mankind in an unprecedented scenario in the future. I think Malaysia is not exclusive from the issues of having water ratio and then having water pollutants from time to time, and therefore this is something that we need to really look at as global and urban population shall increase to 6.4 billion by 2050 worldwide, and these may cause higher water demand, especially for people working in the cities. So we are not a water-stressed countries, but when the availability of fresh water per person increases due to demand personally, so we shall be looking at how might we increase and reuse wastewater reclamation as part of the plan to integrate all activities and sustainably. Next slide, please. How might we manage water to sustain people and environment? So this is very important for the public to understand that water, sanitation and hygiene are sustainable, and there are still exist inequalities in access of fresh water. Improve water quality and wastewater management by 2030 as advocated by the ministry as well as IWK earlier on. We shall look also at the sustainable use of freshwater resources, increase water productivity. By doing all of this water management to sustain people and the environment, we shall be able to reduce both urban population with untreated industrial wastewater, but rather reclaim and reuse wastewater, increase urban and industrial wastewater reuse safely, while at the same time reduce nutrient pollution from, for example, in agricultural activities. Next, please. This is just to share with everyone watching through Facebook the wastewater reuse pathway. I'm sure that wastewater and water experts are very familiar with this, but for the public, in layman words, where did we produce most wastewater that is coming actually from our home, from our daily activities? Wastewater coming from washing dishes, eating at restaurants, washing your clothes, washing your cars, anything that involves water in your daily routines. And then this wastewater then goes to the sewerage system to be collected there. And we know that IJBUK is doing a great job in terms of treatment of the wastewater, whereby the wastewater treatment system converted some of these wastewaters into biosolids. Some of it are being recycled. Some of it are safely being discharged into the receiving water bodies for reuse. And then some of the solid waste this goes to the landfill for further treatment. We look at the final column, which talks about the reuse of wastewater that we reclaim from wastewater treatment plants. So domestic usage, forestries, urban irrigation, district cooling, composting, agricultural purposes. So these are the examples of wastewater reuse pathway that we may have seen also in many other studies or researches by the academics. And there are a lot more wastewater treatment technologies that highlights how might we then incorporate wastewater reuse practices. Next slide. The benefits of wastewater reuse practices is reduced energy for chemical fertilizers, nutrients recovery, optimizing water resources. For instance, in many regions in the world, the use of reclaimed water for irrigation is the most experienced activity. So there are a considerable number of wastewater treatment plants that has been increased after the first large-scale activated sludge, for example, was used in Finland back in 1970. So the concern of the wastewater treatment was to remove organic pollutants, in which IWK is already excellently doing. For example, removing the BOD and the CODs, the nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus. So all of these are really the science part of wastewater treatment technologies. And then total solids as well to prevent pollution. So the kind of water that has been treated that goes back into river does not contain any of these elements, making sure that we have clean and safe water supply at the end. For example, when you turn on your pipe, you dapat clean water coming back from treated wastewater. And then, of course, in terms of wastewater treatment technologies, we shall be looking at a wastewater treatment plant that should be durable, sustainable, efficient, and reliable in serving the communities in which IWK is already doing. Next slide, please. It is no longer appropriate to consider treated wastewater as a waste that requires disposal, but rather as a resource that can be put to beneficial usage. So treated effluent should be made suitable as it is economical for augmenting traditional water supplies. And then, of course, there are many other things that we should be looking at when we wish to use wastewater that is reclaimed from treatment plants. Such as the safety and then the approach, how might we make sure that everything is treated by conventional treatment plant is showing results that we wish as the final product that we wish to deliver to community. And then wastewater treatment technologies can also be implemented for further removal of organic matter residuals, removing nutrients, heavy metals, and then all of the pathogenic microbial, for example. All of these has been and is actually ongoing in our countries. Therefore, we know that the type of wastewater that we are putting back into our receiving water bodies are safely to be reused. The most common advanced wastewater treatment technologies, I can mention some here. You probably have heard of these technologies before: membrane technologies, filtration, advanced oxidation processes, anaerobic wastewater treatment. At university level, we are doing all of this. These are common research topics, research areas to which universities are doing, even at my university. So even though many efforts have been made and progress have been reported in wastewater treatment technologies, there are still a lot more research that can be done to ensure that how might we best harvest our wastewater as one of the economic contributing resources in the future. Next, please. And as a conclusion, the progress of sustainable development is bound by how well wastewater and water are managed. Environmental dignity and harmony are both essential to be preserved for future generations. And we are doing the right thing by looking at the Sustainable Development Goal, and everything is aiming to achieve by 2030. And we are also in great support of the Malaysian government to recycle at least 33% of the national treated effluent by 2030. And I think I would like to end my presentation today with a quote by Masaru Emoto. By holding the intention of peace towards water, by thinking, speaking, and acting with the intention of peace towards water, water can and will bring peace to our bodies and to the world. So thank you so much. I look forward to receiving your questions. Thank you. Back to you, Joseph.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Nohayati, and also to all our speakers for sharing with us this morning. Indeed, they were very insightful, very refreshing as well, and it's very informative to find out all these activities or initiatives that are being done to enhance or further advance the use of reclaimed water from treated effluent and what it means for our economic, social, and environment purposes. We'll now enter into a time of question and answer. I guess this is where, if you have just joined us halfway through this session and you are wondering what the speakers were sharing earlier, this is a time for you to recoup and to regather all the information that might have left along the way. And this is also an opportunity for us to explore every nook and cranny that you are curious to find out about reclaiming water from treated effluent. So this serves also as a reminder to all participants to submit your questions through the Facebook comment page, and we'll do our best to go through them. As is, we already have a long list of questions, so we will do our best to try and go through all of them. All right. Now let's move on to the next session, which is the Q&A. And for the first question, this is directed to Inche Azwan. Now, if the water quality is of good grade, can we use this as a drinking water? And if so, is it safe? So, Inche Azwan, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Joseph. Interesting question. I'll attempt at answering this particular question, but the two other speakers, I mean, feel free to also contribute your inputs on this. But my view is that RO water is, for example, is drinkable, but would require several mineral insertion to happen. The way I understand it, RO process removes all the elements in water that we require as part of a drinking water. However, more importantly, I believe that when we have water reclamation or reclaimed water in the picture for the industries, it frees up the resources for the normal consumption. I mean, in the areas where there's a bit of water stress issues, instead of, say, for example, in that particular area in any parts of Malaysia, there's a bit of a water stress. There are industries in that particular area. So if there is a water reclamation initiative there, this particular water reclamation plant will be able to free up certain resources because it's supplying recycled water for the industries. So, for example, if there's XMLD that are previously used by the industries, so that amount of XMLD can now be used for the normal consumptions as a day-to-day punya usage lah. That's my view. I think that's where the beauty of water reclamation or recycled water can help to ease up in terms of the drinking quality water lah.
Okay. And the next question comes from a participant who wants to find out how can we get access to this treated water? I guess it sort of stems out from the first question as well, on whether it can be used and whether it's safe for drinking. But now, if it is so, can they actually get their hands on this treated water? I think Mr. Kevin, if you'll be keen to share.
Well, just to add to Cik Rizwan's answer earlier on, yes, I agree it is safe to drink, except that, like what he correctly mentioned, there may be certain minerals that are missing. Because like in Ice Lemon's case, when we distribute treated water, there are certain minerals like fluoride. There's also chlorine added to make sure that uh, the water is safe to drink. So in the case of reclaimed water, there will not be fluoride, but there will be chlorine. That's a requirement by SPAN. And it's actually, if you stop at the RO water stage, it's actually the water produced is actually pure water. It's the water which you use, or very close to the water which you use uh, to in your, what do you call that, in your cars, for example, where you cannot have minerals, because any minerals in the water will cause your engine to stall. So in that sense, yes, it can be safe for drinking, but I think the issue is more a psychological one rather than a technical one. So in terms of availability, we are here. I think Azwan and myself are here to speak to anyone who's interested in purchasing reclaimed water. The sole plant at the moment is at Setia Alam, but we are looking to expand to Section 23. And we are speaking to interested parties. So whoever it is that is interested, industrial customers, I think domestic customers a little bit further off down the road, but at the moment we are focused on industrial customers first. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is directed to Dr. Noor Hayati. And this participant would like to find out, how do we ensure greater awareness on water reclamation among the public? And how can we educate the general public about this initiative?
Okay, thank you, Joseph, and thank you to the person who is asking. It's a good question. I think it is still far away from having our community to be all fully accepting domestic usage of reclaimed wastewater as compared to industrial usage of reclaimed wastewater. Normally, the health risks, the environmental effect, cost of the treatments, and then skill of the treatment technologies, public perception and acceptance are key challenges for reuse of the reclaimed wastewater. It is of paramount importance to understand that due to climate change and global impact, as I mentioned, urbanization, and then people overloading the cities for jobs and for residential, we are bound to one day be more acceptive and receptive of having to use reclaimed wastewater as one of the key resources for water reuse. And then it is part of the awareness creation as well, when people is one of the key pillars for water sector transformation. So as people, we are the end users, we use water, and then we conduct all the daily routines that eventually contributes to wastewater that we produce from what we do and how we use water on a daily basis. So it is of, it begins at personal level as to how might we can educate ourselves and general public. We are part of the general public. How might we change our perception towards reclaimed wastewater? So anything that you do by using water, even when you drink a glass of clean water, it comes out as wastewater. So what can we do with that wastewater that we ourselves produce? This is a long-term understanding, but if we start now educating young people from primary school, for example, by integrating wastewater and water education into primary schools, letting children know the importance of protecting water resources as well as the importance of saving water, we may be able to reduce the need to use reclaimed wastewater for domestic usage or even for having it as one of the source for our drinking water. So it goes back to how might we actually use water, but not actually to encourage the public to accept and reuse the reclaimed wastewater, but rather how might we use water so that we can avoid all of these circumstances that we may not want in the future. I think that's my thought for the moment for this topic, for this question. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nohayati. I guess, yeah, it involves a very intricate process when, as you mentioned, taking a glass of drinking water, and also, stemming from the comments by Encik Azwan and Kevin, Mr. Kevin, that sometimes we take it for granted, and when we have used it and it's being treated at a wastewater treatment plant and goes back as a water supply from the water bodies and taken by Air Selangor, somehow we do not have that process or that awareness in mind. And I guess that really comes and boils down to the long-term understanding by all the audience, and including myself as well. The next question is for Encik Azwan. And this has got to do with, I guess, the larger picture of what was presented by our Prime Minister regarding the water sector transformation. And the question is this water reclamation initiative a part of the water sector transformation plan?
Well, thanks, Joseph. Well, I think I echo what Dr. Nohayati has shared earlier as well. I think she mentioned about being one of the pillars of WST 2040 or Water Sector Transformation 2040. People is one of the pillars. But I think if I recall correctly, the CASA or the house of WST 2040, though, I think when it comes to the top part, there'll be the objectives of WST 2040. I think there are two objectives. One of it being water security and sustainability. The other one, if I recall correctly, is water as an economic opportunity, if I'm not mistaken. So I think these two important objectives are pretty much in line with what we are doing today in terms of water reclamation. Of course, not to a scale that we can be, we're still at a very infancy stage in terms of scale, but eventually, if done right, I think WRP can, or water reclamation or water recycling can provide some sort of water security and sustainability for certain areas. In terms of the second pointer, in terms of economic opportunities, I think we are already creating new economic opportunities, not only for the operators, but for the end user. I think at the end of the day, we're talking about the off-takers and all those, we are creating more economic opportunities. And there are a lot of, in the supply chain of WRP, the people that are going to be benefit out of it as well, in terms of technology transfer, in terms of vendors, expertise at the various scale and whatnot. So I think going back to WST 2040, I think there's also in terms of governance, there's in terms of finance and infrastructure. So these are, I think, the elements that if we see it from the holistic point of view, we can see the relation with what we are doing today in terms of water reclamation. So that's just my quick answer on that particular question. My two other fellow speakers, if you wanted to add. And
I guess, yeah, if we can sort of also rephrase then, because there's a question about this supply of reclaimed water. Encik Azwan, you mentioned that it really depends also on the end users, and so far, I guess the context that we are speaking about is really for the industrial consumers. So there's a question about, and this is thrown to all the speakers, are there plans to supply reclaimed water to customers, or rather to consumers, people like you and me, the ones who are using this daily in our homes, I guess? Perhaps to Mr. Kevin, since you have that combined
Is
experience.
there a plan? Well, I mean, as a producer of treated and reclaimed water, I mean, if there's demand, obviously we will supply. Um, we don't discriminate against whether it's industrial or consumer or domestic consumers. So it's more a matter of whether the domestic consumers are ready to accept reclaimed water as for potable use. But as producers, as suppliers of water, whether it's treated or reclaimed water, we are ready. You know, one thing which I think needs to be touched on, which I think actually builds on what Dr. Nohayati mentioned earlier on scarcity and of water and sustainability of water is unfortunately I have to bring this up, tariffs lah. And this is something which we face when as Central Water, when we speak to potential off-takers as well. Costs to industrial consumers are obviously very important in the sense that whatever adds on to the cost will increase the cost of the product. So for us, I think whether it's reclaimed water or treated water, I think what is missing is consumers have yet to build in or have yet to acknowledge the cost of the environment. When we treat water, when we produce treated water and reclaimed water, there's also an environmental cost to it, which is frequently forgotten. We always think about the cost to produce water, the electricity, the chemicals, the distribution network, but there's actually an environmental cost to it, and even more so when it comes to Indah Water, because essentially if Indah Water doesn't do its job, the environment suffers. So we should all be thankful that Indah Water actually does its job and is now trying to upgrade its plants to a better standard. It's also good for your treated water, because when we abstract water from the river, if the river is poor quality, it means the cost of chemicals increases, the process of treating water, the cost of it increases. So it's all interlinked. So that is an important factor, which I think when we speak about water as a scarce resource, as a sustainable resource, with regards to the environment, is frequently left out. So that's what I wanted to add to that point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin. Again, to all our audience and participants, if there are any questions that you would like to pose for our speakers today, please feel free to drop us the questions on the Facebook comment section. We have considerably a lot of questions coming, and we hope to get through all of them within this hour that we have. Okay, this next question, I guess, is directed to Dr. Nohayati. This, while it may be quite general in its approach, I guess this is also quite an important subject to consider, which is Malaysia ready for using recycled water from treated effluent?
Thank you for the question. So I'm asking you back, Malaysia, are you ready for treated effluent? So are we ready? Are we ready? If you ask me personally, well, I've been working as an academic for over almost 14 years now, working with NGO for all my life since my student days. And then have had a humble experience of seeing how things are done, and then have worked with IWK, for example, for many years. I would say that we are going there. We are going towards having the readiness in terms of embracing reclaimed wastewater as one of the future resource for any industrial or domestic usage at a larger scale. Obviously, Pengurusan Air Selangor is already doing it, and Indah Water has two major collaborations in terms of wastewater reclamation projects. It really is up to the public and community as to how might we embrace the concept of reclaim effluent as the future source of water. Of course, there will be questions on public health protections and, as to the aesthetic values of water that is being produced, that is being reclaimed. And of course, there will be specific purposes of reclaimed wastewater. What can we use it for? Because at the moment, it is not for drinking, it is not for bathing or washing your clothes or washing your dishes or for preparing food at the restaurants. The usage is much more into potentials in agricultural purposes, for example, or industrial purposes, watering plants, for example, washing your car, things that are not related to anything concerning so much on your public health as end user. So I would say that we are going towards there. Otherwise, today we wouldn't be having this discussion on reclaimed wastewater. So this is as part of instilling that awareness creation also among community and public as to how might we then look at this differently, probably in the near future. So that's all that I can comment on that, Joseph. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nohayati. And I think there's also a follow-up to that question, or rather that comment then. And this was originally for Encik Azwan, but I guess this is where all the speakers can also chime in and provide their thoughts. When we talk about reclaimed water from treated effluent, it does not seem that it is for potable use, which is for drinking or for bathing at probably my house. But will we see a future where we only use treated water from the treated effluent? I guess that's really the question.
Well, from Ais Lemar's perspective, I'd say unlikely lah. But I obviously have my business to consider. But I think that there's room for both treated and reclaimed water to coexist. At the end of the day, it's the same resource anyway. Whether it comes from the river or whether it comes from bioeffluent, treated effluent, it's ultimately the same scarce raw resource that we need to protect and use wisely.
Well, if I may add to Mr. Kevin, I hope not. I still wish personally to have treated water, but I most welcome reclaimed water. Yeah, so I most welcome it, but I would love to have treated water still. Yeah.
Great. And Mr. Kevin, you brought up a very interesting point about the coexistence of treated water, which is already what Ais Selangor is producing for Klang Valley, and as well as then the corresponding state water operators to their own states. So when it comes to the matter of coexistence, there is a question from one of our participants asking how much can reclaimed water reduce our dependency on raw water resources?
Reduce dependency. Well, reclaimed water ultimately, as I said, comes from the same resource. If we don't recycle the reclaimed water, it gets discharged into the river, and it gets ultimately abstracted again from the rivers by Ais Selangor. So that's part of the circular economy process. It's just where you abstract the raw water resource, whether you abstract it before it gets discharged into the river, or whether you wait for it to be discharged into the river and in certain cases gets polluted by industries, and then we have to. So it's ultimately the same resource. It's just abstracted or extracted from different locations. So the only way you can actually reduce dependency actually is more from a consumer's perspective, because again, coming from Ais Selangor, the average consumption of water in Malaysia is much higher than elsewhere in the world. I think the benchmark that CASA has indicated is 180 mld per day. But in Klang Valley, for example, we are looking at more than 210 mld per day. So there's a lot of wastage. That's a bit counterintuitive coming from someone who produces water, because obviously the more you consume, the more revenue I get. But as I said, water, treated water is a scarce resource. So we're not just about selling water, we're also about selling sustainable water. So in that sense, if you really want to look at reducing dependency on raw water, I think what we should be looking at is using water in a responsible and sustainable manner. As water operators, we are already starting to look at producing water and supplying water in a sustainable and responsible manner. But consumers also need to play their part. They need to consume in a responsible manner as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin. There is a question from one of our participants asking, can the water be used for edible fruit plants or agricultural purposes? I think we covered this earlier, but I guess it's a good reminder for those who have probably just joined us. Is this reclaimed water from treated effluent actually usable for fruit plantations or agricultural purposes?
Well, the short answer is yes, it can be used. But as I said, if it's RO water, that means it's stripped of all its minerals. It's essentially pure distilled water, which is not the best water to be used for agricultural purposes. But it can be used. There's nothing to stop anyone from using reclaimed water. I mean, and if there are parties interested in using reclaimed water for agricultural purposes, we are more than happy to speak to them.
Yeah, if I may add, I agree with Mr. Kevin. Studies and researchers have shown in published journal publications that reclaimed water is good, and it can be used for agricultural purposes, widely globally used for agricultural purposes, because obviously the soil compositions in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus scientifically improved because of the nutrients contained in the reclaimed water. However, the only thing that we have to be cautious about is oversupplying of reclaimed water to our, agricultural for agricultural application. So just to make sure that we achieve that nutrient balance, and then avoiding oversupplying of chemicals and things like that. But it can be used. It's no problem, no issue.
Thank you very much. And I guess there's also then the follow-up question, and this is particularly for Dr. Noor Hayati. But before I ask this question, we have time for 3 more questions. So do keep your questions coming, and we will try to fit them all in within this Q&A session. So coming back to the question, Dr. Noor Hayati, when it comes to the supply of treated or rather reclaimed water from treated effluent, should any amendment be done with the Environmental Quality Act 2009 to suit reclaim initiative?
Okay, thank you, Joseph. Tough question, because this is about policies and governance that governs, how might we then look at Environmental Quality Act way back in 2009, and then now is 2021. So generally, with current treatment technologies for reclaimed water, wastewater reclamations may include, I think we can agree to the quality of reclaimed water, that it is not free from heavy metals. It is not free from pharmaceutical products, for example. There shall be more investigations to be made on antibiotic resistance materials in reclaimed water, or byproducts. As referring to the former question just now on agricultural purposes, we can use reclaimed water. However, we have to be cautious about oversupplying of nutrients, coming from reclaimed water for agricultural application. there might be needs in terms of relooking at policy and governances for this, especially we wish to avoid any vulnerabilities in terms of when we use reclaimed water for any purposes at all. So a coherent set of national laws, regulations, policies, guidelines are definitely needed in terms of using reclaimed water. And then we shall also include emerging pollutants into the Act when it comes to application and implementation of reclaimed water for any purposes at all. So if this is not, I'm not well versed in terms of what is the EQA 2009 governing for reclaimed water, but it is worth relooking at the governance and policies so that we can have a much more, inclusive to avoid, as I say, vulnerabilities in terms of using reclaimed water for any purposes at all. Thank you.
All right. We have time for 2 more questions. So the next one is, I guess, a concern that is raised by our participant, which is a valid concern as well. And this person would like to know, how can we ensure that the reclaimed water will not be misused by the industrial players, particularly in food and beverage industries, in preparing food and drinks for human and animal consumption? Yeah.
I guess I shall attempt to answer that question. That there is no foolproof way to ensure they don't misuse. But having said that, of course, there are regulations in place. SPAN regulates the industry. But as responsible suppliers and producers of water, obviously we will not supply them reclaimed water if we know their intention is to use it for food and beverage, unless the regulator has imposed certain restrictions and certain quality requirements, which at the moment has not been put in place, maybe in the future. So I think to answer your question, at the moment, regulation does not allow reclaimed water to be used as for potable purposes, or in this case for F&B purposes. So in that sense, there shouldn't be any misuse because the regulation does not allow for it. I hope that answers your concerns.
Great.
Well,
thanks, Mr. Kevin. Yes.
Can
was there
I-
something you'd like to add?
Yeah, can I add on, Joseph? I think Kevin covers it very well in terms of answering that particular question. But I just like to add on to this and also an earlier question. I think a lot of perception about the usage of treated effluent and also eventually reclaimed water for anything that relates to consumption of food and whatnot. Of course, as what Kevin rightly mentioned, that the regulations now or the guidelines says that it's strictly for non-potable usage. But in terms of, just to share some knowledge sharing, I think some for our treated effluent, what we have done is actually we have also engaged with few jabatan agama and in order to get we have some fatwa in terms of mengatakan that penggunaan ataupun penghasilan bioeffluent terawat from our LRK berpandukan dengan hukum syarat-syarat wilayah persekutuan, berpendapat that the sistem infrastruktur yang mengalirkan kumbahan itu berupaya menjadikan air kumbahan tersebut suci lagi menyucikan, dalam kurungan air mutlak. So in a way, even at the treated effluent stage, the treated effluent is something that can be used for, the PBTs are using it for siram pokok and whatnot. But imagine from that same treated effluent being further treated to become reclaimed water, I think from this perspective of human consumption is quite fine. But of course, as we discussed earlier, there's some issues in terms of minerals and whatnot, and also of course we stand guided by the regulations as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope that puts to ease your concerns if you're about to go to your nearest restaurant or local eatery that they are not using the treated effluent or rather the reclaimed water from treated effluent at that particular place to serve you your nasi lemak or your mee goreng. All right. Um, Unfortunately, we have only the last question, and we can only take this within the time that we have. And this question is, will the cost of treated reclaimed water come in a cheaper rate than the current water that we are using? I guess the comparison of the cost that industrial consumers are paying as opposed to what we are getting from our homes.
The short answer is no, it will not. But the long answer, it is not because treated water is too cheap. But on a most to elaborate on that, actually the cost of RO water, because it goes through a lot more processes like ultrafiltration and reverse osmosis, is more costly compared to the normal treatment process. But that doesn't take away from the fact that treated water is also too cheap. But yeah, so the answer is no, the reclaimed water is not cheaper than treated water. I would say it's comparable, depending on the quality that you need. Certain companies which require higher, better quality water will be a lot more expensive.
Okay. And I guess that is all the time we have. Once again, I would like to extend very deep gratitude to Mr. Kevin Lee, to Dr. Nohayati, and also to Encik Azwan for sharing with us regarding and having this dialogue on treated water from effluent this morning. To all our participants and to all our audience, if you had just joined us or you had left out on the large chunk of this presentation, do not worry. This is actually available as a recorded session on Facebook. So you can visit us on our IWK website or rather the IWK Facebook page to obtain the recording, and you can watch it from the beginning to have a more comprehensive understanding of what we were discussing about regarding the topic of wasted or harvested, a dialogue on on reclaiming water from treated effluent. So that is all the time that we have this morning to explore a complex but entertaining subject. We hope that all of you managed to gather more input from our speakers and found it helpful in expanding your horizon. Well, I certainly did. And so that concludes our session this morning. Thank you all for tuning in and to our speakers for sharing with us. To every one of you, stay safe, take care, and have a good week ahead.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you,
Have a good
Joseph,
day.
Azwan, Doctor. All right. Good day.
Thank you.
Everyone else as well.